Hey, I'm firearms attorney Gilbert Ambler, and we are back to talk about more of the issues with the ATF's pistol brace ruling. And before we dive into all of these issues, again, if you have not yet subscribed, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. And as you know, we're a relatively new YouTube channel, so make sure that your friends hear about us as well, so that they can also get information about this very important subject that affects so many gun owners out there. In our last video, and we will link to that last video in the comments, in the last video we talked about some of the issues associated with registering your braced pistol as an NFA controlled short-barreled rifle. And in addition to all of the concerns that I talked about in that last video, my friend and colleagues over at Gun Owners of America have been raising the concept that there is the possibility of an enforcement action if you get disapproved through no fault of your own, but simply because the system is overwhelmed and it takes too long to make it through and results in an automatic disapproval because the system has not processed you through in 88 days. So that's a separate concern. It's worth knowing about that. But I want to talk, and because of all these concerns, I want to talk about the possible criminal liability that you face even if you don't register your braced pistol and even if you no longer leave it in a braced pistol format. Because as you probably know, the ATF has said that there are essentially 4 things you can do if you are currently in possession of a braced pistol. The first one's really ridiculous, which is turn it over to the ATF. And I can't imagine any lawful gun owners want to do that. The second, register it, and we talked about all the problems associated with that. And that leaves people considering the next 2 options, which are either put a barrel of over 16 inches on it and make sure that the overall length is over 26 inches, which converts your pistol into a rifle, but not a short-barreled rifle, meaning not subject to the NFA, or get rid of the brace, destroy the brace, or get the brace out of your possession. That way there's no constructive possession concerns and it leaves your weapon as a pistol, albeit a pistol without a brace on it, okay? Of those last 2 options, which many people are considering, turning it into a rifle or leaving it as a pistol and removing the brace, there is still concern that the ATF could still come after you. And I know that this sounds maybe far-fetched to people, and my job as a defense attorney is always to think about worst-case scenario. So this is worst-case scenario that I'm discussing, but it's not totally crazy when we're talking about the ATF, because we've seen the ATF go back and forth on this stuff. As many of you probably remember, there was the whole saga with Diversified Machine, which involved people making their own silencers or suppressors with solvent trap kits, and the ATF went back and forth on that and said as long as you had formed one DIT and it was on the NFA registry, you were okay, and then they changed their minds about that. So I have concern for you, even if you leave your weapon, get rid of the brace, leave it as a pistol, or turn it into the rifle. And the concern is from statute, okay? The statute I'm gonna reference is 26 USC 6531. And 26 USC 6531 is the statute of limitations for when you can be prosecuted for an offense under the Internal Revenue Code. Now keep in mind, the National Firearms Act, the NFA, is a tax code, okay? That's how Congress believed they had the power to regulate these firearms, is through their power to tax. Now the very interesting thing about this, and this is going to be litigated, is the fact that because the ATF is offering to forbear the tax, not collect the tax, if you register these items, I think there's a good argument that this really does not fall under the power to federally regulate these items as a taxing power, because if you're not actually getting any tax, how can you justify it as a taxing statute? So that's a separate issue. Nonetheless, this is the code section that says general 3-year statute of limitations for a offense arising under the tax code. Okay, that means if you violated the tax code for 3 years, they could prosecute you unless the offense relates to the willful desire to evade taxes. Okay, because if the offense relates to the willful desire to evade taxes, then what happens is the statute of limitations is bumped out to 6 years. Okay, it doubles the statute of limitations. And I keep using this term statute of limitations. It's worth talking about that a little bit. The statute of limitations is how long the government has to come after you and prosecute you after an offense has occurred. The general idea being that for most offenses, and there's typically exceptions for very serious offenses like murder, typically no statute of limitations on a murder, they could prosecute you whenever they get enough evidence to move forwards. But for most offenses, they don't want you to have to run around for the rest of your life worrying about a red light that you ran at some point. So they limit how long the government has before they could come after you. And that's what the statute of limitations is. It's the limitation after an offense has occurred. How long does the government have to prosecute? And in the context of evading the tax for an NFA item, I believe it's going to be a 6-year statute of limitations. What's that mean? It means for the next 6 years, the government's going to argue you were in possession of a short-barreled rifle. Now, we would argue it's a braced pistol. They're going to say, yeah, we don't think it's a braced pistol. We think it's a short-barreled rifle, and you didn't pay the tax, and therefore, for the next 6 years, they could prosecute you. Now, how would the ATF, if you don't register the item, how would the ATF ever get the evidence that you possessed one of these things? Well, the ATF has two methods that they could go about getting that evidence. The first is through their administrative inspections or even criminal inspections at gun stores or at FFLs, because the ATF has the power to up to once per year administratively inspect a gun store, or if it's a criminal investigation, they can get a warrant and go through a gun store's records. So they might go after a particular manufacturer, somebody who's been manufacturing and selling items with braces attached, collect all their records, figure out where all of those braced pistols went, and figure out whether people actually registered them or what they did with them. So that's one way that the ATF might track this down. The other way would be far more basic, which would be you doing something silly. You putting pictures of your braced pistol online, saying, man, I missed this thing. You talking to your friends about it, you talking to others about having possessed a braced pistol, and the ATF catching wind of it somehow and deciding to come after you and prosecute you. So my advice to you, if you possess a braced pistol, because this rule is going forwards, it seems, and unless and until a court stops it, you should do a couple things even if you decide you're not going to register it. If you decide you're not going to register it and you're going to remove the brace and leave it as a pistol or convert it to a rifle, you still should not be talking about what you have. You should not be posting pictures. You should not be discussing it with your friends. And God forbid anybody ever shows up, knocks on your door, and wants to discuss it, you need to lawyer up and you need to shut up and make sure that you are not making any statements about having ever possessed it, because there is the danger of criminal prosecution for up to 6 years after the ATF could prove you possess this thing. Again, we're going to keep you up to date with updates and regular videos filmed as this thing moves forwards, because there are challenges coming. We're going to talk about those challenges. We're going to talk about the law. And if you want to stay abreast of all of this, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Make sure that your friends know about us also.